Welcome back to the Shadow Journal. In the archives of human suffering, there is a name that whispered terror into the hearts of emperors and peasants alike for over 3,000 years. It didn't care about your walls, your armies, or your gods. It was known by many names: the Red Plague, the Speckled Monster, or simply Smallpox. Imagine a disease so ruthless that it killed 1/3 of everyone it touched. Those it didn't kill, it marked forever. It left their faces carved into a landscape of jagged scars. And in many cases, it stole their sight, leaving them to wander in a world of permanent darkness. For centuries, this was the background noise of human existence. It was a lottery of death that everyone played every day. It was the demon that sat on the throne of every civilization, from the pharaohs of Egypt to the courts of Europe, waiting for its next harvest. Tonight, we unseal the dossier on Vieira La Magia. This is not just a medical history. It is a biography of a monster. We are looking at the story of the only human pathogen we have ever truly defeated, and the terrifying realization that even in death, the demon still casts a long, cold shadow over our modern world. The sound of a heavy vault door closing. The rustle of ancient, brittle parchment. The paradox of smallpox is its intimacy. Unlike the plague, which relied on fleas and rats, smallpox needed us. It lived in our breath. It traveled in the touch of a hand or the fibers of a blanket. It was a social predator. To love someone, to care for them while they were sick, was to invite the demon into your own blood. The files show that smallpox was the ultimate civilization killer. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas, they didn't conquer the Aztecs and the Incas with swords alone. They brought a biological storm. A population that had never seen the speckled monster was decimated. Within decades, 90% of the indigenous population was gone. Not from steel, but from a microscopic invader that turned their cities into silent graveyards. This was the first time the world saw the power of the invisible weapon. It was the realization that a virus could do what an army never could: erase an entire culture from the map. Act 2. The anatomy of the eruption. To understand the fear, we must look at the cold, clinical anatomy of the attack. Smallpox is caused by the variola virus. 'Tis a large, complex virus that, once inhaled, begins a silent countdown inside your lungs. For 12 days, you feel nothing. You are walking through your life unaware that a war has already begun in your bone marrow and your lymph nodes. Then, the fever hits. It is a high, burning heat that feels like your blood is turning to steam. But that is just the beginning. A few days later, the speckled part of the monster appears. A rash starts in the mouth, small, red spots that turn into sores. This is the moment the virus becomes a weapon. Every time you cough, every time you speak, you are exhaling a cloud of death. Then, the rash spreads to the face, the arms, the legs, and finally, the trunk. These are not just rashes. They are pustules, deep-seated, firm, round blisters that feel like buckshot under the skin. They grow, they merge. They fill with a thick, opaque fluid. The pain is described in the files as an unending fire. The skin becomes so inflamed that it feels like it is being pulled apart from the inside. In the most severe cases, known as hemorrhagic smallpox, the skin doesn't blister, simply turns black and begins to leak blood. At this stage, death is not just a possibility, it is a mercy. The sound of a pen scratching on a medical chart. By the 18th century, humanity was desperate. The archive shows the first instances of variolation, a primitive, dangerous gamble where doctors would take the pus from a dying patient and rub it into the skin of a healthy person. They were fighting fire with fire. It was a terrifying ritual of survival, a precursor to the modern vaccine, born of a time when the only way to beat the demon was to invite a smaller version of it into your body. Then came Edward Jenner. In 1796, he noticed that milkmaids who had contracted cowpox, a milder disease from cattle never, caught the speckled monster. He took a risk that would change the course of human history. He scraped the hand of a milkmaid and inoculated a young boy. The boy became immune. The vaccine was born. The word itself comes from vacatha, Latin for cow. We had found a way to use nature to shield ourselves from nature. But as the files show, the demon wouldn't go down without a fight. Act Sen, the global execution. The mid-20th century saw the most ambitious project ever undertaken by our species, the global eradication of smallpox. Led by the World Health Organization, teams of doctors and volunteers went into the most remote corners of the planet. They went into war zones, into jungles, and into crowded slums. They weren't just delivering medicine. They were conducting a global manhunt for a virus. This was ring vaccination. Whenever a case was found, they would vaccinate everyone in the surrounding area, creating a firewall of immunity that the virus could not jump. They were starving the monster, one person at a time. The files document the final victims. In 1975, a 3-year-old girl in Bangladesh named Rahima Banu became the last person to have naturally occurring variola major. In 1977, a man in Somalia named Ali Maulin became the last person to have variola minor. In 1980, the world officially declared smallpox dead. For the first time in history, we had wiped a predator off the face of the earth. We closed the book. We burned the blankets. We thought we were safe. The sound of a heavy metallic click. The hum of a high-tech refrigeration unit. But the dossier reveals a chilling postscript. The demon was eradicated from the streets, but it was preserved in the lab. 2 official repositories remain, the CDC in Atlanta and a high-security lab in Russia. These are the Ghost Vials. Inside these frozen tubes lies enough genetic material to restart the apocalypse. The archive shows that during the Cold War, both superpowers looked at smallpox not as a defeated enemy, but as the ultimate biological deterrent. They figured out how to weaponize it. They looked at ways to make it more stable, more airborne, and more lethal. They turned the speckled monster into a Cold War ghost, a weapon so terrifying that its mere existence was enough to keep the world in a state of frozen fear. Act 4. The lingering shadow. As we reach the final entry of this dossier, we are forced to ask, is the monster really gone? We live in an age of synthetic biology. The archive shows that in 2017, researchers were able to reconstruct a relative of the smallpox virus using only DNA fragments ordered online. They didn't need the Ghost Vials. They only needed the code. This is the secondary shadow of smallpox. The knowledge of how to build the demon is now out there, floating in the digital ether. We have a global population that is no longer vaccinated. We have cities that are more connected than ever. If the speckled monster were to return today, it wouldn't move at the speed of a sailing ship. It would move at the speed of a jet engine. The dossier is back in the vault. The smallpox chapter is officially closed, but the paper is thin and the ink is still wet. We look at the scars of the past and we tell ourselves we are the masters of our biological destiny. But the files remind us that nature is a patient stalker. It doesn't need to win every battle. It only needs to wait for us to forget. Smallpox is the only demon we have ever truly killed. But in the silence of the high-security freezers and in the lines of code on a computer screen, the ghost is still breathing. The archive is closing. The shadow remains. Good night, and until the next entry in the Shadow Journal.